Economic supply. The theory of supply. Supply. This is the amount of goods and services the producers are willing to produce and put on market for sale at a given price and at a given period of time. Quantity supplied is a desired flow, i.e., it measures how much producers would like to sell and not how much they actually sell. Individual supply. This is the quantity of a commodity that a firm/producer is willing to sell at various prices during a given time. Market supply. This refers to quantities of a commodity that all producers are willing to offer for sale to a particular market at various prices during a given time. Types of supply. 1. Competitive supply. This is the supply of two or more commodities that use the same resource for their production such that an increase in the supply of one product leads to decline in the supply/production of the other. E.g.s include eggs and meat from chicken, milk and meat from cows, crop and animal production from a piece of land, etc. 2. Joint/complementary supply. This refers to the supply of two or more commodities from the same process of production/same source such that an increase in supply of one commodity leads to an increase in supply of the other. E.g. meat and skin from slaughtered animals, petrol, diesel and paraffin from crude oil through fractional distillation. The supply function. This is a statement which shows a technical relationship between quantity supplied and the major determinants of quantity supplied. It is summarized as follows. QS equals F point P4O, PN, FN, GT, etc. Where PON is the price of the commodity. P2OPN is the price of the other commodity. Economic supply. Quantity supplied of a commodity ceteris paribus/ of the factor being constant. A table showing the supply schedule. Price per unit SHS. Quantity supplied per month Inc. 2,000, 20,000, 3,000, 40,000, 4,000, 70,000, 6,000, 100,000. From the supply schedule, we can get the supply curve. The supply curve. This is a locus of points showing the quantity of a commodity supplied at different price levels in a given period of time, i.e., it is a graphical representation of the supply schedule. A supply curve slopes upwards from left to right, indicating that more of a commodity is supplied at a higher price and less is supplied at lower price. An illustration of the supply curve. 8,000 supply curve. As 6,000, 4,000, 2,000, 1,000. As economic supply. The slope of the supply curve. The supply curve is positively sloped, i.e., it slopes from left to right, showing the direct relationship between the price and quantity supplied of a commodity. The positive slope is explained by the following factors. R. Entry of new firms in the industry. When the price of a commodity increases, new firms are attracted to enter in the industry in order to enjoy the prospects of increasing profits. This leads to an increase in supply as price increases. Roman 2. Profit motive. As producers aim at maximizing profits, they supply more at higher prices in order to increase the profitability of the business. A fall in price of the commodity reduces the quantity supplied because it is no longer profitable for them to sell more at low prices. Roman 3. The struggle to maintain equilibrium in free market conditions. As demand increases, price increases as well. Due to shortage, firms increase output in order to cover the shortage. Roman 4. Ease of diverting resources from the production of a commodity whose price has reduced to the production of a commodity whose price has increased. For example, when the price of groundnuts increases, keeping the price of beans constant, producers easily divert resources, i.e. land, labor, and capital, from production of beans to production of groundnuts. This leads to an increase in the supply of groundnuts as the price increases, since producers expect high profits. Abnormal curves/regressive/exceptional supply curves. These are curves that do not obey/conform to the law of supply, such that more of a commodity may be supplied at low price or less of a commodity may be supplied at a high price. There are two types of regressive supply curves, namely backward bending/sloping supply curve. Economic supply. From the diagram above, SL is the backward bending supply curve of labor. When the wage rate increases from OW0 to O1, labor supply increases from OH0 to O1 after point of workers start working for fewer hours because wage O1 was enough to meet their targets. At wage OW2, labor supply reduces to OH4. Causes of a backward sloping supply curve of labor. I. Strong preference for leisure due to accumulated incomes. Such a worker may prefer to work for less hours and spend most of the time enjoying leisure, even when the wage increases. Roman 2. The presence of target workers, i.e. some individuals get employed with certain aims or targets within their minds, and once they have achieved them, they offer less hours of work even when the wage has increased. Roman 3. Increased levels of progressive taxation. This because the harder the person works, the higher the amount of tax paid, and therefore such a worker decides to work for less hours. Roman 4. Political instability in an area. The fear of losing life due to insecurity makes people to work even when wage rises. The reduction in real incomes. The high general prices greatly reduce the purchasing power of the worker and see no reason for working harder even at a higher wage. Women's sex. Poor health of workers. This weakens the worker and makes it hard for him to increase the number of hours worked even at a higher wage. Woman 7. Poor conditions of work. These make the employees to hate the work and are not prepared to increase the number of hours even when the wage is increased. 2. Fixed supply curve. This is a situation where an increase in the price of a commodity does not have any effect on quantity supplied at all levels of price. Wage. SL. Economic supply. An illustration of a fixed supply curve. Pollen. Vote. Us. Zero co-quantity. In the figure above, despite the increase in price from OP0 to OP1, quantity supplied remains the same at OQ0. Factors that affect / influence / determine / supply. The favourable factors lead to high supply and the unfavourable natural factors lead to low supply. 1. The price of a commodity. High price of a commodity leads to high supply of a commodity. This is so because higher prices mean greater profits and so firms are attracted to supply high quantity of the commodity. On the other hand, low price of a commodity leads to low supply because of the low profits earned, which discourages production, hence low supply. 2. Price of a jointly supplied good. High price of a jointly supplied good leads to high supply of the commodity in question. This is so because the high price of the jointly supplied good makes it more profitable to supply it, which leads to high supply of the commodity in question since they are both supplied from the same source / process of production. On the other, low price of a jointly supplied good leads to low supply of the commodity in question. This is so because the low price of the jointly supplied good makes it less profitable to supply it, which leads to low supply of the commodity in question because they are both supplied from the same source / process of production. Price. S. Economic supply. 3. Price of a competitively supplied commodity / good. High price of a competitively supplied good leads to low supply of the commodity in question. This is so because the high price of the competitively supplied good makes it profitable to supply it than the commodity in question. On the other hand, low price of a competitively supplied good leads to high supply of the commodity in question. This is so because the low price of the competitively supplied good makes it less profitable to supply it than the suppliers opt for the commodity in question. 4. The cost of production. High cost of production leads to low supply of a commodity. This is so because the low profit margin enjoyed by the producers. On the other hand, low cost of production leads to high supply of a commodity. This is so because of the high profit margin enjoyed by the producers. 5. The state of technology. The use of advanced techniques / methods of production leads to high output / supply of a given commodity. This is so because of the high level of efficiency in production. On the other hand, use of poor / primitive / rudimentary techniques of production leads to low output / supply of a commodity. This is so because of the low level of efficiency in production. 6. The goal / objective of the producer. A producer whose aim is profit maximization produces low output. This is so because he / she wants to restrict output and sell at high profit per unit sold. On the other hand, a producer whose aim is sales maximization produces high quantity of output. This is so because he wants to make profits by maximizing sales. 7. Government policy on production of the commodity. Favorable government policy on production of a commodity in terms of low taxes imposed on a commodity leads to high supply of a given commodity. This is so because it leads to low cost of production, which implies high profits. On the other hand, unfavorable government policy on production in terms of high taxes leads to low supply of a given commodity. This is so because it leads to high cost of production, which implies low profits. 8. The gestation period of a commodity. A long gestation period leads to low supply of a given commodity. This is so because it takes a long time to produce and supply such a commodity. On the other hand, the short gestation period leads to high supply of a given commodity since it takes a short period to produce and supply such a commodity. Economic supply. 9. Number of producers / suppliers in the market. A large number of producers leads to a high supply of a good. This is so because supply is from many producers. However, a small number of producers leads to a low supply of a good since there are few producers to supply the commodity. 10. Natural conditions / factors. Favorable natural factors lead to high supply of especially agricultural products. This is so because it favors the production of such products. However, unfavorable natural conditions lead to low supply of especially of agricultural products because they discourage / limit their production. 11. The political climate / atmosphere. Political stability leads to high supply of a given commodity. This is so because peace and stability enables people to engage in production of goods since they are not scared of losing their lives and property. However, political instability leads to low supply of goods. This is so because it discourages production of goods since people are scared of losing their lives and property. 12. The market size / demand for the commodity. A large market size leads to high supply of a commodity. This is so because large market implies high profit margins, thus motivating them to produce high output levels. On the other hand, a small market size leads to low supply of a commodity because a small market size leads to low profit margins, hence discouraging production. 13. Level of entrepreneurial skills. Presence of good entrepreneur skills leads to high supply of a commodity because there are many people to initiate businesses and sustain them. On the other hand, low level of entrepreneurial skills leads to low supply of a commodity. This is so because there are few people to initiate businesses and sustain them. 14. The land tenure system. A favorable land tenure system promotes production, leading to high supply of a given good. This is so because producers have easy access to land, leading to high production levels. On the other hand, poor land tenure system discourages production, leading to low supply of a given good. This is so because of the difficulty in accessing land, thus leading to low production levels. 15. The state of infrastructure. Good infrastructure, for example good roads, lead to high supply of a commodity. This because they lower the cost of transportation of goods to the market. On economic supply. The other hand, poor infrastructure, for example bad roads, lead to lower supply of a good. This is because of the high cost of transportation of goods to the market, which discourages production. 16. Availability of factor inputs, e.g. raw materials, capital, skilled labor. Adequate supply of factor inputs such as capital leads to high supply of a good/commodity. This is so because the producers are able to purchase enough raw materials and produce goods and services. On the other hand, limited supply factor inputs, for example limited capital, limits supply of a good because they cannot purchase enough raw materials, which limits production. Factors that lead to high supply of a commodity. High price of the commodity. High price of a jointly supplied good. Low price of competitively supplied good. Low cost of production. Advanced/high state of technology. The goal of the producer being sales revenue maximization. Favorable government policy on production of a commodity / short gestation period. Large number of producers. Favorable natural factors. Political stability / favorable political climate / atmosphere. A large market size. High level of entrepreneurial skills. Favorable land tenure system. Good infrastructure. Adequate supply of factor inputs. Factors that lead low supply of a commodity. Low price of the commodity. Low price of a jointly supplied good. High price of a competitively supplied good. High cost of production. Economic supply. The goal of the produce being profit maximization. A favorable government policy on production. Long gestation. Small number of producers. Unfavorable natural factors / conditions. Political instability / unfavorable political climate / atmosphere. A small market size. Limited / low levels of entrepreneurial skills. Poor land tenure system. Poor infrastructure. Inadequate supply of factor inputs. Change in quantity supplied. This refers to an increase or decrease in the quantity supplied of a commodity due to the change in its price, when other factors that affect supply remain constant. Change in quantity supplied is illustrated by movement along the same supply curve, either upward or downwards. Economic supply. C. P2. I. Po. Pun. S. Ocon QOQ quantity. In the graph above, the downward movement along the same supply curve indicates a contraction in supply / decrease in quantity supplied, i.e. A to B. This is due to a fall in price from OPO to OPON, indicating a decrease in quantity supplied from OCO to OCON. No high decrease in quantity supplied. This is a situation when less of a commodity is supplied due to a decrease in its price, when other factors that affect supply are held constant. The upward movement along the same supply curve indicates an extension in supply / an increase in the quantity supplied, i.e. A to C. This is due to an increase in price from OPO to P2, indicating an increase in quantity supplied from OCO to OQ2. Roman 2, an increase in quantity supplied. This is a situation when more of a commodity is supplied due to an increase in its price, when other factors that affect supply remain constant. Change in supply. Economic supply. At each possible price OP0 in the graph above, quantity supplied can increase or decrease because of changes in other factors affecting the quantity supplied. Increase in supply illustrated by the shift of the supply curve to the right, i.e. so to so. Quantity supplied increases from OQ0 to OCON at a constant price OP0. Factors that cause a change in supply of a commodity. Change in the price of a jointly supplied good. An increase in the price of a jointly supplied good leads to an increase in supply of the commodity in question. This is so because an increased price of the jointly supplied good makes it more profitable to supply it, thus leading to an increase in supply of the commodity in question since they have the same procedure of production. On the other hand, a decrease in the price of a jointly supplied good leads to a decrease in supply of the commodity in question. This is so because the reduced price of The jointly supplied good makes it less profitable to supply it and thus a reduction in the supply of the commodity in question because they came from the same procedure of production. Change in the price of a competitively supplied commodity/good. An increase in the price of a competitively supplied good leads to a decrease in supply of the commodity in question. This is so because the producers shift the resources to the production of the competitively supplied commodity, which is more profitable. On the other hand, a decrease in the price of a competitively supplied good leads to an increase in supply of the commodity in question. This price S1 SO, S2, the S1, SO S2, economic supply, is so because the producers shift the resources to the production of the commodity in question, which is more profitable. Change in the cost of production. An increase in the cost of production leads to a decrease in the supply of a given commodity. This is so because of the reduced profit margin. On the other hand, reduced cost of production leads to an increase in supply of a given commodity. This is so because of the increased profit margin enjoyed by the producers. Change in the state of technology. Improvement in the state of technology leads to increase supply. This is so because of the increased level of efficiency, which encourages more production. On the other hand, decline in the state of technology leads to a decrease in supply. This is so because of the reduced level of efficiency, which lowers the production. Change in the goal/objective of the producer. A change in the goal of the producer from sales revenue maximization to profit maximization leads to decrease in supply of a given commodity. This is so because the producers want to supply less output to force an increase in price and make more profits. On the other hand, the change in the goal of the producer from profit maximization to sales revenue maximization leads to an increase in supply of a commodity because he/she bring more on the market to increase his or her revenue. Change in government policy on production of the commodity. Favorable change in government policy on production of a commodity in terms of reduced taxes imposed on a commodity leads to an increase in its supply. This is so because it leads to reduced cost of production, which encourages production. On the other hand, unfavorable change in government policy on production in terms of increased taxes leads to a reduction in supply of a given commodity. This is so because it leads to increased costs of production, which discourages production of goods. Change in the number of producers/suppliers in the market. An increase in the number of economic supply. Crops and animals grow faster, which increases agricultural output. An unfavorable change in natural conditions lead to a decrease in supply of especially of agricultural products because they destroy crops and animals, which lead to a reduction in output levels. Change in the political climate/atmosphere. Favorable change in political climate lead to increased supply of a given commodity. This is so because peace and stability enables people to engage in increased production of a given good since they are not scared of losing their lives and property. However, unfavorable change in political leads to reduced supply of a given good. This is so because it discourages increased production of a given good, since people are scared of losing their lives and property. Change in the market size/demand for the commodity. A reduction in the market size leads to a reduction in supply of a given commodity. This is so because it reduces the profit margins, thus discouraging producers to increase output levels. On the other hand, an increase in the market size leads to an increase in supply of a commodity because the increased market size leads to increased profit margin, hence encouraging producers to increase output. Change in the level of entrepreneurial skills. Improved/increased level of entrepreneurship leads to increased supply of a given commodity. This is so because of increased ability to initiate businesses and sustain them. However, a decline in the level of entrepreneurship leads to a decrease in the supply of a given commodity. This is so because of the reduced ability to initiate businesses and sustain them. Change in the land tenure system. An improvement in the land tenure system leads to increase in supply of a given good. This is so because producers have easier access to land, leading to increased production levels. On the other, unfavorable change in the land tenure system leads to a decrease in supply of a given good. This is so because it makes it more difficult to access land, leading in production levels. Economic supply. Changes in the supply of factor inputs, for example, change in the level of capital. An increase in capital level increases supply because the producer is able to buy more raw materials and increase production. On the other, decrease in capital reduces supply because the producer buys fewer raw materials, which lead to a decrease in production. An increase in the supply of a commodity. This is a situation where more of a commodity is supplied due to favorable changes in other factors that affect supply when price is constant. It involves a shift of the supply curve to the right. An illustration of an increase of a commodity. From the above illustration, an increase in supply is indicated by the shift of the supply curve from so-and-so to S2, leading to an increase in supply from O to O. Factors that lead to an increase in supply of a commodity. Natural factors becoming favorable. An improvement in techniques of production. A fall/reduction in the cost of production. An increase in the number of suppliers in the industry. An increase in the market size. An increase in the demand for the commodity. Reduction in the gestation period for a commodity. Change in the goal of the firm/producer from profit maximization to sales revenue maximization. Favorable government policy on production of a commodity. D. Reduce taxes / increase subsidization. Price. S1. S2. P1. S2 S1. 0Q. Economic supply. An improvement in the political climate. An improvement in the entrepreneurial skills. An improvement in the land tenure system. An improvement in the state of infrastructure. An increase in the price of the jointly supplied good. A decrease in the price of a competitively supplied good. Breakdown in infrastructure. Reduction in supply of factor inputs. Reduction in the gestation period. Decrease in supply. This refers to a situation when less of a commodity is supplied due to unfavorable changes in other factors that affect supply when price is constant. It is indicated by a shift of the supply curve to the left. Pun. So. OQ token quantity. From the illustration above, the decrease in supply is indicated by a shift of the supply curve to S2 leading to a decline in supply from OQ to OQ2. Factors that lead to a decrease in supply of a commodity. An increase in the cost of production. Natural factors / conditions becoming unfavorable. A decline in the level of technology / methods of production. A reduction in the number of suppliers / producers in an industry / exit of some firms from the industry. Political atmosphere / climate becoming unfavorable. Economic supply. Government policy on the production of the commodity becoming unfavorable. E.g., increased taxes / reduced subsidies. A fall in the entrepreneurial skills / ability. Breakdown of infrastructures. Decrease in the price of jointly supplied product. Increase in the price of a competitively supplied commodity. Market equilibrium. Equilibrium price. This is price established in the market when quantity demanded is to equal quantity supplied of a commodity. Equilibrium price also changes from time to time. It is also known as clearing price, i.e., it is set or fixed at the point of intersection of demand and supply curves in a free enterprise economy. Equilibrium quantity. This is the quantity exchanged when the market is in balance, i.e., quantity demanded and quantity supplied are equal, therefore there is no shortage or surplus in the market, which means that neither buyers or sellers are inclined to change the price of the quantity, which is an essential condition for equilibrium. The only quantity that accomplishes this task is at the intersection of the demand curve and supply curve. An illustration of equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. Price ds. OQ quantity. In the illustration above, point E is the equilibrium point and OQ represents the equilibrium price, while OQ represents the equilibrium quantity. Deriving the market equilibrium using the demand and supply functions. P. Economic supply. Market equilibrium is derived by using the demand function and the supply function, where quantity demanded QD is equal to quantity supplied QS. When solving for equilibrium price and quantity, you need to have a demand function and a supply function. E.g., if your monthly demand function is QD equals 10,000 ATP and your monthly quantity supply function is QS equals 20p, then set QD equals QS and solve. Solution. QD equals QS, i.e., 10,000 minus ATP equals 20p. 10,000 minus ATP plus ATP equals 20p plus ATP. 10,000 equals 100p. Therefore, P equals 10,000 / 100 equals 100. Equilibrium price equals 100. And B, equilibrium price has no units. This is because it is hypothetical / theoretical. To find equilibrium quantity, we substitute equilibrium price 100 into either the demand function or supply function as follows. Economic supply equals 2000. Therefore, QD equals QS as shown by the substitution above. Exercise. Given that IQS equals minus 12 plus 12 EP and QD equals 36 minus 4p. Roman 2 QD equals 24 minus 4p and QS equals minus 8 plus 8p. Roman 3 QD equals 24 minus 2p and QS equals minus 12 plus 4p. Calculate the A. Equilibrium price. B. Equilibrium quantity. The concept of consumer surplus. This refers to the difference between what a consumer is willing to pay and what he/she actually pays for the commodity. Or, it is the extra utility / additional satisfaction a consumer enjoys without paying for it. It is given by the following formula. Consumer surplus equals price consumer is willing to pay the actual price paid fixed market price or final expenditure actual expenditure. Note, consumer surplus is limited by income inequality among consumers, changing marginal utility of money, differences in tastes and preferences and presence of goods of ostentation. Economic supply. T. The is shown as the area under the demand curve and the prevailing market price. In the illustration above, if the consumer purchases a commodity at OP, we note the following. Total utility is equal to OP/EC. Expenditure by the consumer is OP/EC. The consumer surplus is illustrated by the shaded area below the demand curve above the market price at which the consumer buys the commodity, i.e. OP/NEP. Example. Using the consumer's demand schedule below, calculate the consumer surplus when the market price is SHS 150. Price consumer is willing to pay 300, 250, 200, 150, 100, 50. Units purchased 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Consumer surplus equals plan expenditure but actual expenditure equals market price times number of units purchased equals 300 plus 250 plus 200 plus 150 150 times 4 equals SHS 900 600 equals SHS 300. P1 consumer surplus. Economic supply. Producer's surplus. This refers to the difference between what the producer actually charges for the commodity and what he was willing to charge. Producer's surplus equals actual revenue expected revenue. O key quantity. In the illustration above, the producer's surplus is shown by the shaded area above the supply curve and below the equilibrium price, i.e. OPEC. Example. Price per unit. 300, 350, 400, 450, 500, 550, 600, 650. Quantity supplied. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Given the market price is SHS 550, calculate the producer's surplus if 6 units are sold. Producer's surplus equals actual revenue planned revenue equals 550 x 6 300 plus 350 plus 400 plus 450 plus 500 plus 550 equals 3,325.15 equals SHS 750. Subtopic 5. The concept of elasticity. Elasticity refers to the measure of the degree of responsiveness of the dependent variables to the independent variables. Dependent variables may be the quantity demanded or quantity supplied, while independent variables are the factors which influence the dependent variables, e.g. price of the commodity, price of other commodities, consumer's income. Elasticity can be taken to mean reaction or response of producers or consumers. Elasticity is of two types. A. Elasticity of demand. B. Elasticity of supply. Elasticity of demand. This refers to a measure of the degree of responsiveness of quantity demanded of a commodity to changes in the factors that affect demand, e.g. price of the commodity, consumer's level of income, and price of related commodities. Elasticity is considered for only 3 major determinants of demand, namely, price of the commodity in question, price of related commodities, the level of income of the consumer. Therefore, there are 3 different concepts of elasticity of demand, namely, price elasticity of demand, cross elasticity of demands, income elasticity of demand, price elasticity of demand. This refers to a measure of the degree of responsiveness of quantity demanded of a commodity to changes in its price, i.e. it shows how much quantity demanded of a commodity responds to a change in the price of the commodity. Economic supply, or PED, equals percentage change in quantity demanded of a commodity, percentage change in the price of a commodity, or PED equals minus Q times P. P, Q, and B. A negative sign is multiplied into the formula to make the answer positive, since price elasticity of demand never is negative. Interpretation of price elasticity of demand. 1. Perfectly/completely inelastic demand. Perfectly inelastic demand is one where price changes have no effect at all on quantity demanded of a commodity. This means that quantity demanded remains constant in spite of the price changes. The coefficient is equal to 0. PD equals 0. A graph illustrating a perfectly inelastic demand curve. OQ quantity. In the graph above, changes in price from OPA to OPON leaves the quantity demanded of a commodity constant at OQ0, e.g. demand of cigarettes. 2. Fairly inelastic demand. This is one where a very big percentage change in price leads to a small percentage change in quantity demanded of a commodity. The coefficient is greater than 0 but less than 1 PED 0. A graph illustrating a fairly inelastic demand curve. T. P1. Per. Economic supply. OQO quantity. In the graph above, a very big percentage in price, e.g. OPA to OPON, leads to a very small percentage change in quantity demanded from OCO to OCON. Unitary elasticity of demand. Unitary elasticity of demand is one where the percentage change in price is exactly equal to percentage change in quantity demanded of a commodity. The coefficient is equal to 1 PED equals 1. OQO quantity. Fairly elastic demand/elastic demand. This is one where a very small percentage change in price leads to a big percentage change in quantity demanded of a commodity. The coefficient is greater than 1 but less than infinity, P done infinity. Price D. P1. Power. An illustration of unitary elasticity of demand. T. Pollen. Theo. Economic supply. Price. T. P2. Or Q2. Quantity. In the graph above, a small percentage in price from O point to O P2 leads to a very big percentage change in quantity demanded of a commodity from O cone to O Q2. Perfectly elastic demand. This is one where at a prevailing price consumers are willing to purchase the commodity infinitely, as much as they want, and none at all at even a slightly high price. The coefficient is equal to infinity. PED equals infinity. An illustration of a perfectly elastic demand curve. Pollen. In the graph above, consumers are willing to buy as much as they want at the prevailing price, i.e. economic supply. 1. Availability of substitutes. A commodity with closed substitutes is price elastic demand because an increase in its price leads to a big reduction in quantity demanded because consumers have cheaper alternatives to turn to. On the other hand, a commodity with no closed substitutes has price inelastic demand because as its price increases, consumers continue buying almost the same quantity because they have no cheaper alternatives to turn to. 2. Degree/level of necessity of the commodity. Demand is price inelastic for essential goods necessities because with increase in price of a commodity, consumers continue buying almost the same amount since they cannot do without them. On the other hand, demand for luxury/non-essential goods is price elastic because with an increase in price of such a good, consumers reduce its consumption since they can do without it. 3. Level of durability/perishability of the commodity. The demand for a durable commodity is price inelastic because as its price reduces, the consumer does not buy. This is because it can be used for a long time without replacement. On the other hand, the demand for a perishable commodity is price elastic. This is because with a fall in its price, more of it is bought because it cannot be kept for a long time, hence needs constant replacement. 4. The proportion of income spent on the commodity. The demand for a commodity, it takes a small proportion of the consumer's income, is price inelastic. This is so because as its price increases, the consumer continues buying it since he does not feel the pinch. On the other hand, the demand for a commodity that takes a big proportion of the consumers is price elastic. This is so because as its price increases, the consumer reduces consumption since he/she feels the pinch. 5. Level of addiction in the use of the commodity. Demand for a commodity consumed out of habit is price inelastic because with an increase in its price, the consumer continues to buy almost the same amount since it is not easy to break/abandon the habit. On the other hand, the demand for a commodity consumed not out of a habit is price elastic because as its price increases, the consumer reduces its consumption since he/she easily abandons the commodity since there is no special attachment to it. 6. Level of income of the consumer. The demand for a commodity is inelastic for a high-income earner because with the increase in its price, the consumer continues buying the same amount of the commodity since he/she can afford to buy it at whatever price. On the other hand, the demand is elastic for a low-income earner because as the price increases, the consumer reduces the amount bought since the purchasing power reduces. 7. The number of uses of the commodity. The demand for commodity with several uses is price elastic because with an increase in its price, the consumer reduces on some of the uses and remains with only the very essential ones. On the other hand, the demand for commodity with a single use is price inelastic because as the price increases, the consumer maintains the quantity bought because he/she has no chance of reducing the quantity bought. Economic supply. Long run, because with increase in price of a commodity, the consumer reduces the amount consumed of it since the time is long enough to change the habit or find a cheaper substitute/alternative. 9. Season. The demand for a commodity during a favorable season is price inelastic. This is so because with an increase in its price, the consumer continues buying such a commodity due to the apparent need for it. On the other hand, the demand for a commodity during an unfavorable season is price elastic. This is because with a reduction in the price of the commodity, the consumer reduces the amount consumed of it due to the reduced apparent need for the commodity. 10. Possibility of postponement of demand for the commodity. The demand for goods, the use of which can be postponed, is price elastic. This is so because as their prices increase, consumers reduce their consumption since their use is not very urgent. On the other hand, demand for a good, the use of which cannot be postponed, is price inelastic. This is because as their prices increase, consumers continue buying them because their use is very urgent. 11. Level of advertising. The demand for commodity which is highly advertised is price inelastic because with an increase in its price, the consumer continues buying since he/she is convinced that the product is better than all the others. On the other hand, the demand for a commodity which is not intensively advertised is price elastic because as the price increases, the consumer drops the demand since he is not convinced to buy. 12. Availability of complement. High degree of complementarity makes the demand price inelastic because as the price increases, the demand for the commodity is maintained since the consumption for the commodity is combined with many others. On the other hand, low degree of complementarity makes the demand price elastic because as the price increases, quantity demanded reduces because its consumption is not combined with any other and the consumer easily abandons it. 13. Degree of convenience in obtaining a commodity. The demand for a commodity which is not convenient to the consumer to obtain is price elastic, because as the price increases, the consumer quickly abandons it since it is burdensome for him/her to obtain. On the other hand, the demand for a commodity that is convenient to obtain is price inelastic, because even when the price increases, the consumer maintains the quantity bought since the commodity is easily accessible. Factors responsible for inelastic demand for a commodity: absence of close substitutes/low degree of substitutability, high degree of complementarity, commodity/presence of complement, economic supply, few uses of a commodity, high level/degree of convenience of getting a commodity, short run period, expectation of future price increase, favorable season, high level of advertising, high degree of urgency in the use of a commodity/inability to postpone the consumption of the commodity. Factors responsible for elastic demand for a commodity: presence of close substitutes/high degree of substitutability, low degree of complementarity, low degree of necessity/demand for luxuries, low degree of addiction in the use of a commodity, high degree of perishability of the commodity, big proportion of income spent on a commodity, low level of consumers' income, many/numerous uses of a commodity, low level/degree of convenience of getting a commodity, long run period, expectation of future price fall, unfavorable season, low level of advertising, low degree of urgency in getting a commodity. Importance/uses of price elasticity of demand to the government. It is used in taxation policy. High taxes are imposed on commodities with inelastic demand, while low taxes are imposed on commodities with elastic demand. It is used in subsidization policy. Government grants subsidies to commodities with elastic demand and denies subsidies to commodities with inelastic demand. It is used in nationalization policy. Government nationalizes firms/enterprises that produce essential goods whose demand is inelastic. It is used in the devaluation of a country's currency. Devaluation is successful. Economic supply. It is used as a basis of price discrimination. The producer/a monopolist charges a high price in a market whose demand is price inelastic and charges a lower price in the market whose demand is price elastic. It is used in wage determination. Employers pay high wages to employees whose demand is inelastic and pay low wages to employees whose demand is price elastic. It is used in pricing of commodities. Producers charge a high price for commodities whose demand is price inelastic and charges low prices to commodities whose demand is price elastic. It is used in determining incidence of a tax. The incidence falls more on the consumer where the demand for the commodity is inelastic, and it falls more on the producer where the demand is elastic. Income elasticity of demand. This refers to a measure of the degree of responsiveness of quantity demanded of a commodity to changes in the income of a consumer. Mathematically, it is given by the following formula: Y(D) equals proportionate change in quantity DD of a commodity. Proportionate change in consumers' income, i.e. new demand, all demand, or Y equals Q times Y, Q, or Y(D) equals percentage change in quantity demanded of a commodity. Percentage change in consumers' income, or Y equals percent, Q, percent Y. Economic supply, Y equals Q times Y, Q, Y equals times YD equals minus 1.2. Interpretation of coefficients of income elasticity of demand. Negative coefficient implies it is an inferior good. Positive coefficient implies it is a normal good. Negative coefficient implies it is a zero. Income elastic. This is when the income elasticity of demand is greater than 1, meaning that quantity demanded changes proportionality more than change in income. A slight change in the consumer's income leads to a very change in quantity demanded. Income inelastic. This is when income elasticity of demand is less than 1 but greater than 0. This means that a large percentage change in income leads to a proportionately less percentage change in quantity demanded. Importance of income elasticity of demand I. It is used in taxation policies. Roman 2. It is used to determine the nature of goods. Roman 3. It is used to forecast future demand for commodities as level of income changes. Cross elasticity of demand. This is the measure of the degree of responsiveness of quantity demanded of one commodity to changes in price of other commodities/related commodities. Cross elasticity of demand equals percentage change in quantity demanded of X. Percentage change in price of commodity Y. Z equals percent QX. Percent pi. Or CD equals proportionate change in quantity demanded of commodity X. Economic supply. Example. Given that the price of commodity Y increased from SHS 100 to SHS 150 and quantity demanded of a related commodity X increased from 50 kg to 90 kg. Calculate the cross elasticity of demand. Z equals QX times pi qx z equals times cd equals 1.6. Interpretation of coefficients of cost elasticity of demand I. Positive coefficient implies the two commodities are substitutes Roman 2. Negative coefficient implies the two commodities are complements Roman 3. Zero coefficient implies that the two commodities are independent / not related at all. Importance / uses of cross elasticity of demand I. Used to classify commodities. Roman 2. Used in the pricing policy. Elasticity of supply. This refers to the measure of the degree of responsiveness of quantity supplied of a commodity to changes in factors that influence supply, such as price of the commodity. Price elasticity of supply. This refers to the measure of the degree of economic supply, or PES equals proportionate change in quantity supplied of a commodity. Proportionate change in price of commodity. PES equals Q times P. Q. Price elasticity of supply has a positive coefficient. Categories of price elasticity of supply. Fairly elastic supply. This is one where a very small percentage change in price leads to a big percentage change in quantity supplied of a commodity. The coefficient is greater than 1 but less than infinity, P so an infinity. OQ quantity. From the diagram above, a small percentage change in price OPA to OPON leads to a very big percentage change in quantity supplied of the commodity. OCOL to OCOL. 2. Perfectly elastic supply. This is one where at a prevailing price or above that producers are willing to supply all they can and none at all below that price. The coefficient is equal to infinity, PS equals infinity. An illustration of a fairly elastic supply curve. P1S. Economic supply. An illustration of a perfectly elastic supply curve. Price. From the graph above, producers are willing to supply all they can at price OP or above price and none at all even at a slightly lower price. Fairly inelastic supply. Inelastic supply is one where a very big percentage change in price leads to a small percentage change in quantity supplied of a commodity. The coefficient is greater than 0 but less than 1 P Shroon. A graph illustrating a fairly inelastic supply curve. P2. Pone. From the illustration above, a very big percentage change in price OPON to P2 leads to a very small percentage change in quantity supplied OCON to OQ2. POSS. Economic supply. 4. Perfectly inelastic supply. Perfectly inelastic supply is one where price changes have no effect at all on quantity supplied of a commodity. This means that quantity supplied remains constant in spite of the price changes. The coefficient is equal to 0, PES equals 0. An illustration of a perfectly inelastic supply curve. OCON quantity. From the illustration above, changes in price from OPON to OP2 leaves quantity supplied unaffected. At OCON. 5. Unitary elasticity of supply. Unitary elasticity of supply is one where the percentage change in price is exactly equal to percentage change in quantity supplied of a commodity. The coefficient is equal to 1, PES equals 1. From the illustration above, the percentage change in price from OPO to OPON is equal to the percentage change in quantity supplied from OCO to OCON. Factors that affect / influence / determine price elasticity of supply. Price. S. P2. P1. S. An illustration of unitary elastic supply curve. Price S. P1. Economic supply. The cost of production. The supply of a commodity is price inelastic when the cost of production are high. This is so because with increase the price of the commodity, producer is reluctant to increase supply due to the low profit margin. On the other hand, supply of a commodity is price elastic when the costs of production are low. This is so because with increase in the price of the commodity, producers quickly supply due to high profit margin. Gestation period. The supply of a commodity with a short gestation period is price elastic. This is so because with increase in the price of such a commodity, producers in position to increase supply within a short period of time. On the other hand, the supply of a commodity with a long gestation period is price inelastic in the short run. This is so because with increase in price of such a commodity, producers are not able to increase supply because the production process takes some time. The state of technology. The supply of a commodity produced using advanced technology is price elastic. This is so because with increase in the price of such a commodity, the producers are to increase the supply of such a commodity due to the use of such modern technology. On the other hand, the supply of a commodity produced using poor technology is price inelastic. This is so because with increase in the price of such a commodity, the producers are not able to increase supply due to the inefficiency of such technology. Perishability / durability of a commodity. The supply of perishable commodities is price inelastic. This is so because with increase in the price of such a commodity, the producers cannot increase supply once existing stock have been exhausted, since such goods cannot be stored for a long time. On the other hand, the supply of durable commodities is price elastic. This is so because with increase in the price of such goods, the producer is able to supply by getting from the stores, since the goods can be stored from the stores. Time period. The supply of a commodity is price inelastic in the short run. This is so because with increase in the price of the commodity, the producers cannot easily increase the supply of the commodity since the time is too short to increase the supply. On the hand, the supply of a commodity is price elastic in the long run period. This is so because with increase in the price of the commodity, the producers can easily increase supply since the time is long enough to allow production and supply of more goods. Natural factors, especially in agricultural sector. The supply of a commodity is price elastic during favorable natural factors such as adequate rainfall, fertile soils. This is so because with an increase in price of a commodity, the producers increase production, economic supply, and supply of a commodity since the conditions are favorable for the activity. On the other hand, the supply of a commodity during unfavorable natural factors such as prolonged drought and fertile soils is price elastic. This is so because with increase in the price of the commodity, the producers are not able to increase production and supply of the commodity since the conditions are unfavorable for the activity. Degree of freedom of entry of firms in production/ease of entry of new firms in the industry. The supply of a commodity is price elastic when there is freedom of entry of firms in an industry. This is so because with increase in the price of such a commodity, it induces other firms to join production since there are no restrictions on entry. On the other hand, the supply of a commodity is price inelastic when there is restricted entry into the industry. This is so because with increase in the price of a commodity is not easily increased since there are few producers due to restricted entry into the industry. Political climate. The supply of a commodity is price elastic when there is political stability. This is so because with increase in the price of the commodity, the producers easily increase production and supply of a commodity, since such situations allow producers to produce more output as they live a settled life. On the other hand, supply of a commodity is price inelastic. This is so because with an increase in the price of the commodity, the producers are not in position to increase supplies of the commodity since such situations do not allow production to easily take place as people do not live a settled life. Future price expectations. The supply of a commodity is price inelastic when there is an expectation of a further future price increase. This is so because with an increase in the price of the commodity, the producers are reluctant to supply more of the commodity since they want to supply more in future at a much higher price. On the other hand, the supply of the commodity is price elastic when there is expectation of a further future price reduction. This is so because with a decrease in the price of the commodity, the producers supply more of the commodity due to fear to sell their output at much lower price. Availability of excess capacity. The supply of a commodity is price elastic when there are firms operating excess capacity. This is so because with increase in the price of a commodity, the producers easily increase production and supply of the commodity. Economic supply. Supply more of the commodity. On the other hand, the supply of the commodity is price inelastic when the government highly taxes the producers. This is so because high taxes increases the cost of production, which discourages producers, thus reducing the supply of a given commodity. Factors responsible for elastic supply of a commodity: low cost of production, shorter gestation period, improved state of technology, existence of durable commodities, long run period, favorable natural factors especially in agricultural sector, freedom of entry of firms in production, favorable political climate, expectation of further future price fall, presence of excess capacity, favorable government policy of subsidization. Factors responsible for an elastic supply of a commodity: high cost of production, longer gestation period, poor state of technology, presence of perishable commodities, short run period, unfavorable natural factors especially in agricultural sector, restricted entry of firms in production, unfavorable political climate, expectation of further future price rise, existence of full utilization of available resource, unfavorable government policy of taxation, importance of price elasticity of supply, used in the devaluation policy. The supply of exports should be price elastic such that producers of exports should be able to increase production and supply more when there is increase in demand for exports. Economic supply. Used to determine the incidence of a tax. A producer pays more of a tax when elasticity of supply is inelastic and pays less when the price elasticity of supply is elastic. Used to determine the wage rate. Labor which has an inelastic supply earns a high wage because it is not easy to get such labor, and labor with an elastic supply earns a lower wage because it is easily acquired. Subtopic C7: Price mechanism and price control. Price mechanism is a system in a free enterprise economy whereby prices in a market are determined by the market forces of demand and supply, and prices act as an automatic signal in the allocation of resources. Under price mechanism, there is consumer sovereignty, where a consumer takes an upper hand in influencing the decision of the producers concerning what to produce, where to produce, for whom to produce, when to produce, and how to produce. And there seems to be an invisible hand that allocates resources. It follows that whenever a consumer buys a product, he is casting a vote in favor of the product. The more he buys, the greater the producer is willing to supply on the market. The role of price mechanism in resource allocation in an economy. 1. Provides automatic adjustment between supply and demand. This is because an increase in demand for a commodity attracts more new firms into production of the commodity, which results into increased supply, thereby overcoming the shortage. 2. Determines the type of technology to be used in production. The producers employ the method of production which is efficient but at the same time affordable so as to produce high-quality products in order to attract more buyers and hence make more profit. 3. Promotes consumer sovereignty / determines for whom to produce. Producers supply goods for those who can afford to buy them or for those who are ready and willing to buy at high price so as to enable them to maximize profits. 4. It determines the income distribution. Producers buy resources from resource owners and therefore income is distributed among the producers and resource owners, those who own economic supply. 7. Ensures production of better quality goods / products. This is so because of competition in production as a result of many producers engaging in production. 8. Guides on what to produce. Resources are allocated to production of those commodities that command high prices in the market so as to enable producers maximize profits. 9. Ensures efficiency of firms. Resources are usually allocated to the production of those commodities where minimum costs are incurred in order to fetch high prices and maximize profits. 10. Guides on resource allocation factor market. Factors of production are attracted to areas where they are highly priced or highly paid. 11. Promotes / encourages innovations and inventions. This is intended to improve the method of production so as to minimize the cost of production in order to maximize profits. 12. Provides variety of goods. This is so because there are many producers in the market who produce a variety of goods so as to meet the different tastes and preferences of the consumers in order to maximize profits, hence widening consumers' choice. Merits / advantages / positive implications of price. Mechanism. 1. It encourages the production of better quality goods. This is because production is competitive, which leads to improvement in the quality of the product. 2. It promotes incentives for hard work, leading to increased production. The profit motive. Encourages hard work, innovations and inventions, hence increased productivity. 3. It encourages efficient allocations of resources because producers produce in response to consumers' demand, therefore cases of overproduction and underproduction are avoided, hence no wastage of resources. 4. It avails a wide variety of goods and services to consumers because there are many producers producing different commodities and this widens consumers' choice. 5. It encourages flexibility in production because producers adjust to changes in the market conditions based on changing price for the commodity. 6. It is a cheap system to maintain / it reduces the cost of administration because of limited government control since adjustments are automatic, i.e. by forces of demand and supply. Economic supply. 9. It helps in the distribution of income. People owning large quantities of resources which are highly priced earn more income than those owning few resources. 10. It decentralizes economic power / promotes consumer sovereignty. This is so because individual households make their own economic decisions. 11. It leads to increased employment opportunities. This is due to increased economic activity / increased investment as people strive to make more profits. Demerits / defects / shortcomings / negative implications of price mechanism. 1. It leads to an even distribution of income or income inequality / disparity, i.e. people with more productive resources earn more income than those with less productive resources. 2. It leads to the emergence of monopoly power and its associated evils. This happens when inefficient firms are outcompeted and driven out of the industry, and the few that remain enjoy monopoly power, which may lead to production of poor quality products, overcharging consumers, etc. 3. It leads to consumer exploitation, and this is due to ignorance of the consumers about the market conditions, which results into charging them very high prices of goods and services. 4. It leads to emergence of unemployment. This happens when inefficient firms are outcompeted in business. Unemployment may also rise when firms adopt capital-intensive techniques of production and bid to maximize profits by minimizing costs. This results into technological unemployment. 5. It leads to divergence between the private and social benefits and costs. This is because price mechanism emphasizes the element of profit. Therefore, producers aim at achieving their private benefits while creating social costs for the society, e.g., environment degradation, resource pollution, water, air, and noise. 6. An ability to adjust to rapid structural changes in the economy. This is because it is forces of demand and supply, and for producers to make any changes they wait for signals from the consumers. 7. It encourages wasteful competition and duplication of activities, and this results into resource wastage as a result of intensive persuasive advertisement. 8. Makes the economy susceptible to economic instabilities such as price fluctuations. The producers. Economic supply. 11. Leads to misallocation of resources. Price mechanism may not allocate resources to priority areas / socially profitable ventures since it is guided by profit motive. This may lead to disappearances of cheap commodities on which the ordinary people survive. Reasons for government interference with the price mechanism. To reduce unemployment, this will be achieved by subsidizing weak firms so that they continue producing so as to maintain employment opportunities in the country. To ensure economic stability, this will be achieved by using restrictive monetary policy, which reduces the amount of money in circulation so as stabilize prices. To ensure production of essential goods and services, this will be achieved by producing public goods which are ignored by the private sector. To regulate production and provision of undesirable products, demerit goods, this will be achieved by imposing high taxes on such goods to discourage their consumption. To reduce on the level of income inequalities, this will be achieved by using the progressive taxes where the rich are taxed more than the poor so as to redistribute incomes. To control the growth and regulate the activities of monopolies, this will be achieved by imposing taxes on their profits so as to redistribute incomes. To reduce consumer ignorance due to market imperfections, this will be done by encouraging formation of consumer associations to provide information about market conditions so that they are not cheated. To reduce on social costs such as pollution and resource exhaustion that affect people's welfare, this will be done by setting regulatory bodies / strict laws to regulate the actions of firms in resource exploitation and waste disposal. To cater for the provision of public and merit goods, this will be done by the government producing and providing them directly. To counter rapid structural changes, this will be achieved through proper economic planning as well as reserving funds which will affect the necessary adjustment in times of structural changes, for example wars, war, famine, floods, etc. Factors that influence / affect / determine price mechanism in resource allocation. 1. Availability of capital. Adequate capital leads to better allocation of resources because that produces the capital to purchase raw materials and hire skilled labor to increase production of goods and services. On the other hand, inadequate capital leads to an efficient allocation of resources because producers cannot purchase enough raw materials and hire skilled labor, leading to low output levels. 2. Level of labor skills. Low levels of skills of workers limit the operation of price mechanism because of low level of productivity and efficiency in production of goods and services lead to low productivity. On the other hand, high level of skills of workers promote price mechanism because of high level of efficiency among workers which lead to add labor leads to high productivity. Economic supply. Limits initiative to undertake business ventures in fear of risks involved by limiting price mechanism in allocation of resources. 4. Degree of monopoly power / number of firms. High degree of monopoly power fails free operation of price mechanism as entry into economic activities by many firms is restricted to only one firm, thereby limiting output levels. On the other hand, where there is no monopoly, entry into economic activities which enables by many firms to enter and increase production. 5. Level of government interference. High level of government interference in former. Heavy taxation of the producers limits the operation of price mechanism because it raises the cost of production which discourages production of goods leading shortages. On the other hand, lower level of government interference promotes price mechanism because the government does not impose many restrictions to producers which lowers the cost of production and attract more producers. 6. Level of ignorance / awareness of producers and consumers. High level of consumer ignorance denies them the right to consume from cheapest sources which lowers the level of consumption, while producer ignorance denies them the right to discover the cheapest sources of raw material which increases the cost of production and thus limiting the operation of price mechanism. On the other hand, high level of awareness about market conditions by the producers enable them to acquire raw materials at fair prices which lowers the cost of production, while consumers are enabled to acquire commodities from the cheapest sources, thus promoting price mechanism. 7. Ability to forecast future trends in demand. Price mechanism works better where producers are to predict changes in the conditions of demand and supply in future to enable them to supply and satisfy the demand. On the other, demand price mechanism fails to work effectively where producers cannot predict changes in demand because they either oversupply or undersupply, which leads to wastage of resources. 8. The degree of rationality of consumers and producers. Price mechanism fails where producers and consumers are irrational because producers fail to minimize costs by buying raw materials expensively, leading to low profits, while consumers fail to maximize utility by buying goods from expensive sources. On the other hand, price mechanism works better where producers and consumers are rational because the producers are able to acquire raw materials at fair prices which increase production, while consumers purchase more goods since they purchase from the cheapest source. 9. The state of technology. Poor state of technology limits the operation of price mechanism. Economic supply. 10. The state of infrastructure. Poor infrastructure in the form of poor roads limits the operation of price mechanism because it increases the cost of distributing goods arbitrarily, leading to shortages in some areas. On the other hand, for example, better roads promote the operation of price mechanism because it lowers the costs of distribution of goods to different areas, which promotes even distribution of goods. 11. The degree mobility of factors of production. High degree of factor mobility, especially labor, promotes effective operation of price mechanism because factors of production easily move to where they are needed, which minimizes shortage of labor and ensure continuous production of goods. On the other hand, high degree of factor mobility limits the operation of price mechanism because factors of production easily to where they are needed, which leads to shortage of labor in some places, which brings production to standstill. 12. Political climate. A stable political climate leads to effective operation of the price mechanism because it ensures continuous production of goods and effective distribution of goods, since producers are assured of the safety of their lives and property. On the other hand, political instability limits the operation of price mechanism because production and distribution of goods is interfered with, since producers are scared of losing their lives and property. Limitations of price mechanism and allocation of resources. Government interference/regulation. Existence of monopoly. Immobility of factors of production. Inability to forecast future trends. Limited entrepreneurship. Irrationality of producers and consumers. Limited capital. Limited skilled labor. Poor infrastructures. Ignorance about market conditions by producers and consumers. Poor state of technology. Political instability. Factors that promote price mechanism and the allocation of resources. Limited government interference. Existence of many producers. High degree of factor mobility. High degree of ability to forecast future trend. High level of rationality among producers and consumers. Improved state of technology. Economic supply. High degree of mobility of factors of production. Political stability. Adequate supply of capital. High labor skills. High level of entrepreneurial skills/ability. High degree of awareness about market conditions by producers and consumers. Measures that can be taken to control/reduce the demerits of price. Mechanism. 1. To introduce progressive taxation. This will ensure that the rich are taxed more than the poor to reduce income inequalities. 2. Provide incentives to protect/prop up weak firms. This will lower their cost of production and thus enable them to continue producing in order to maintain employment opportunities. 3. Issue licenses. This will help to regulate the activities of the investors by restricting the number of licenses issued so as to control over-exploitation of resources. 4. Encourage formation of consumers protection organizations/associations. This will create awareness among the consumers on issues concerning the prices and the quality of goods on the market so that they are not exploited. 5. Introduce price controls to ensure stable prices. This can be achieved through setting maximized price to protect consumers and minimum price to protect producers against exploitation. 6. Put in place anti-monopoly laws. This will guard against emergency of monopoly firms so as to minimize their evils. 7. Provide public goods and merit goods. This will be achieved by the government allocating resources to produce such goods since they are ignored by the private investors. 8. Undertake proper planning. This will be done in order to effect the necessary adjustments in order to counter structural changes. 9. Enact laws/set up regulatory bodies. This will regulate economic activities by setting guidelines on how to use the resources, thus minimize environmental degradation, e.g. NEMA and NFA. Economic supply. Price control/price legislation. This refers to the situation where the government fixes the prices of commodities, either a maximum price to protect consumers or a minimum price to protect producers. Such a price which is fixed is referred to as an administered price. Minimum price legislation. This is the setting/fixing of prices of commodities by the government above equilibrium price, below which it becomes illegal to buy the commodity. It protects producers. MB. Price support. This is where the government bars the surplus output in the market arising out of fixing the minimum price in order to avoid discouraging producers. Maximum price legislation. This is the setting/fixing of prices of commodities by the government below the equilibrium price above which it becomes illegal to sell the commodity. It protects consumers. Maximum price/price ceiling. This is the legal price set by the government below the equilibrium price above which it is illegal to sell the commodity. The major aim of fixing the maximum price is to protect consumers from being exploited by profit-hungry traders. The maximum price is also referred to as price ceiling because it is the highest price above which nobody should sell the commodity. P. S. T. An illustration of maximum price/price ceiling. Price DS. P1 maximum price. O key quantity. Economic supply. In the diagram above, the maximum price is set at OP and below the equilibrium price OP. Reasons for setting a maximum price/price ceiling. 1. To protect consumers from being exploited by the businessmen through overcharging. It is illegal to sell above it. 2. To encourage the consumption of a particular commodity, most especially merit goods, because the price is made low enough for consumer. 3. To maintain price stability through controlling inflation. This is because sellers are not supposed to charge above the maximum price. 4. To control monopoly tendencies. This is because monopolists are not supposed to charge above the administered price. Merit/positive implications of setting a maximum price. 1. It protects the consumers from being overcharged by the producers. 2. That helps to make commodities available to all income groups of people in the economy. 3. It enables to maintain price stability in an economy since the sellers are not supposed to sell the commodities above the maximum price. 4. It helps to control monopolistic tendencies and its associated evils such as overcharging, since the monopolist is not supposed to sell above the maximum price. Demerits/negative effects of setting a maximum price. 1. It leads to artificial shortage of goods. This because the price is too low to encourage supply and yet consumers are willing to buy. 2. It encourages trade malpractices such as smuggling, hoarding and black marketing. This is because the business people want to sell at high prices. NBE, a black market is a situation where producers/sellers sell goods illegally at a price higher than the price fixed by the government. 3. It leads to underutilization of resources, because producers produce at excess capacity since they are discouraged by the low price. Economic supply. 5. It leads to high government expenditure because of the high administrative costs incurred by the government to employ scouts/enforcement officers to ensure that goods are sold at the administered prices. 6. It leads to unemployment. This is due to reduced levels of investment since the maximum price discourages the investors. 7. It leads to misallocation/inefficient allocation of resources. This is because the government sets the prices and ignores the market forces of demand and supply. Minimum price/price floor. This is the price set by the government above the equilibrium price, below which it becomes illegal to buy the commodity. The price is set in order to protect the producers from being exploited by the buyers. It is also called the price floor because it is the lowest price below which a commodity cannot be traded. Economic supply. P. Or K. Quantity. A minimum price point is set above the equilibrium price. Reasons for setting a minimum price. 1. To protect producers from being exploited by the buyers who normally offer low prices for their products. This is because it is illegal to buy the commodity below the administered price. 2. To control price fluctuations of agricultural products that are affected by changing climatic conditions. This because the price is set by the government and cannot change unless the government decides so. 3. To encourage mass production of goods/to accelerate the rate of economic growth. This is because the price is high enough to encourage production. 4. To offset an economic recession/depression. This price is high enough to encourage production, which increases incomes of the people and thus be able to buy goods. 5. To encourage creativity and innovativeness in production. This is because high prices motivate them to innovate and increase production. 6. To minimize the exploitation of labor. This is through setting a minimum wage which makes it illegal to pay a worker below it. Economic supply. 2. Enables producers to realize stable incomes. 3. Leads to increased production of goods and services. 4. Helps an economy out of an economic depression/recession. 5. Helps to establish industrial peace. 6. It minimizes exploitation of labor. Demerit/negative implications of setting a minimum price. 1. Leads to manageable surpluses, because the minimum price motivates the producers to produce more goods and yet consumers are discouraged to buy. 2. It leads reduction in social welfare. This is because the minimum price is set above the equilibrium price and therefore it becomes expensive for the buyers to purchase from the producers. 3. It leads to high administrative costs. This is because the government employs scouts to monitor the set price in order to ensure that goods are sold at the fixed price. At the same time, the government is forced to buy the surplus output through price support system. 4. It increases the cost of production. This is because of the high cost of labor due to a minimum wage. 5. It leads to technological unemployment. This because entrepreneurs adopt capital-intensive technology to minimize the high cost of labor due to a minimum wage. 6. It leads to misallocation/inefficient allocation of resources. This is because the government sets the prices and ignores the market forces of demand and supply. Reasons for legislating prices by the government include: to protect consumers against exploitation from greedy businessmen, to control monopoly power, to control inflation/ensure price stability, to protect producers from being exploited by the consumers to increase output, hence accelerate economic growth, to make commodities available to all groups of people, to help establish industrial peace, to stabilize producers' incomes, to reduce income inequality. Economic supply. Demerits of price legislation. Leads to unmanageable surpluses. Leads to unemployment due to reduced investment. It reduces incentives for private entrepreneurs. Leads to shortages in supply due to increased demand. Leads to inefficient allocation of resources due to distortion of price mechanism. It is expensive for the government to enforce because of high administrative costs. It encourages trade malpractices, e.g. smuggling. It leads to increased cost of production. It leads to reduction in social welfare due to high cost of living. Leads to underutilization of resources due to production at excess capacity. Subtopic 8. Price fluctuations. Price fluctuations refer to unstable prices of goods over a given period of time, and in this case it refers to the state of upward and downward movement of prices, especially of agricultural products. There is greater oscillations/fluctuations in prices of agricultural goods as compared to prices of manufactured goods. The causes of agricultural price fluctuations. 1. The long gestation period. Agricultural commodities have long gestation period, and their supply cannot be increased in the short run, which forces prices to rise due to scarcity. However, in the long run after harvesting, the supply increases, which forces the prices to fall due to excess supply on the market. 2. Agricultural products are bulky, hence difficult to transport. When there is surplus output in an area, it becomes difficult to transport the excess supply to other areas, which leads to a fall in price. However, during a period of scarcity, it is hard to transport products to the area, which leads to an increase in price. 3. Heavy dependence on natural factors which affect the level of output. Unfavorable natural factors such as prolonged drought, floods, pests and diseases reduce the supply of economic supply. 5. Divergence between planned and actual output. When actual output is greater than planned output due to favorable natural factors, it leads to excess supply of agricultural products in the market, thus leading to a fall/decrease in their prices. On the other hand, when the actual output is less than the planned output due to unfavorable natural factors, it leads to decrease in the supply of agricultural output, which leads to a rise/increase in their prices. 6. Many producers, hence planning is difficult/poor planning by the farmers. When farmers fetch high prices in one season, they plan to produce more in the following season, which increases supply and thus forces the prices to fall. On the other hand, when the prices are low in one season, farmers plan to produce less in the following season, thus forces the prices to rise because of the shortages/scarcity. 7. Weak bargaining position on the world market/external determination of prices of agricultural products. The major buyers of agricultural products dictate the prices of agricultural products. When supply of agricultural products increases, they offer low prices in the market. This forces the middlemen to reduce the prices paid to the local farmers. On the other hand, when supply reduces, the buyers offer high prices because they compete for the little output, and this enables the middlemen to increase the prices paid to the local farmers. 8. Low price elasticity of demand for agricultural products. When quantity supplied increases, the sellers quickly reduce the price to clear the market, and when supply reduces, they quickly increase the price since consumers still buy even at higher prices. 9. Low income elasticity of demand for agricultural products. Farmers increase production as the incomes of the buyers increase, hoping to sell more and earn high profits. However, the buyers maintain the quantity bought, which leaves the farmers with excess output and thus reduction in price, and sellers increase price as output reduces since the consumers are able to buy even at higher prices. 10. Poor surplus disposal system/machinery. D. Poor infrastructure. The poor transport system makes it hard to transport excess output to regions of scarcity, therefore prices fall in areas of surplus in order to minimize loss, and when supply reduces, prices rise since little was stored, and it is also difficult to increase supply from other areas. 11. Change in cost of production. Increase in cost of production compels farmers to reduce production, which reduces output, leading to an increase in prices, while a decrease in cost of production attracts many farmers to produce, which increases production, leading to a fall in prices. 12. Substitution of agricultural products with synthetic products. When the demand for synthetic products increases, the demand for agricultural products reduces, leading to a fall in their prices. On the other hand, a decrease in demand for synthetic products, a demand for economic supply. Reduced use of raw material saving technology, the demand for agricultural products increases, leading to a rise in their prices. 14. Weak commodity agreements. These fail to regulate supply, and as a result, prices reduce when members oversupply and prices increase when supply reduces. The effects of agricultural prices fluctuations. 1. It leads to unstable export earnings. In some seasons, an increase in export prices increases export earnings, while in some seasons a decrease in export prices leads to a fall in export earnings. 2. Leads to fluctuations exchange rates. An increase export prices leads to an increase foreign exchange inflow, which results to a decline in the exchange rate, and a fall in export prices lead to reduction in foreign exchange inflow, which leads to a rise in the exchange rate. 3. Leads to unstable government revenue. An increased prices of agricultural products widens the tax base, which increases government revenue since earnings of the farmers increase, and a fall in prices of agricultural products reduces the tax base, which leads to a decrease in government revenue due to the fall in the farmers' incomes. 4. It leads to fluctuations in the balance of payment position. An increase export prices results into improvements of the balance of payment position due to an increase in foreign exchange inflow, and a fall in export prices worsens of the balance of payment position due to a fall in foreign exchange earnings. 5. It leads to fluctuations in incomes of the farmers/agricultural producers. An increase in the prices of agricultural products leads to an increase in the incomes of the farmers, and a fall in prices of agricultural products leads to a fall in the farmers' incomes. 6. Leads to unstable terms of trade. Increased prices of agricultural exports leads improvement in the terms of trade, and a fall in prices of agricultural exports leads to decline in the terms of trade. 7. It worsens the problem of income inequalities. A fall in prices of agricultural products makes the farmers to earn much less compared to people in other sectors of the economy, which worsens income inequality. 8. Investment in agriculture becomes uncertain. This is because farmers earn unstable incomes which make lose interest in farming and thus some abandon agricultural production. 9. It leads to unemployment. A fall in prices of agricultural products reduces investment in the sector and thus lowers employment opportunities. 10. It encourages rural-urban migration and its associated evils. The fall in prices of agricultural products restrains many farmers, which pushes them to urban areas in search of better employment opportunities. 11. It makes projected planning difficult. This is because prices change from time to time, hence making earnings uncertain, which necessitates redrawing of plans from time to economic supply. Measures that can adopt taken to stabilize prices of agricultural products in an economy. 1. Undertake agricultural diversification. This will encourage the farmers to undertake several economic activities within the sector. This will avoid overproduction of one commodity, thus minimizing surplus. 2. Improve on the transport system. This will ease transportation of agricultural products from areas of plenty to areas of scarcity, which will stabilize prices in all the areas. 3. Promote agro-based industries. This will provide a stable market for agricultural products which help to avoid excess supply and thus ensure stable prices or add value to the products. To prolong the shelf life. 4. Strengthen/join international commodity agreements. This will improve the bargaining power of the producers' agricultural products in the international markets, which will help to stabilize prices of such products. They also regulate supply to avoid over or underproduction. 5. Modernize agriculture. For example, encourage irrigation. This will reduce dependence on nature, which will ensure continuous production throughout and thus stabilize supply and prices of agricultural products. 6. Undertake market expansion and diversification. This will create wide market for the agricultural products, which will help to avoid flooding the market, hence ensure stable prices. 7. Encourage contract farming. This will encourage the farmers to sign contracts with the consumers about the quantity and price before production takes place, which will ensure stable prices. E.g., a poultry farmer can sign a contract with the hotel manager to supply chicken and eggs at an agreed price before production takes place. 8. Encourage cooperative societies. These will market the produce for the members and negotiate for fair prices for such products, as well as regulating supply to avoid over or underproduction. 9. Improve storage facilities. This will regulate supply by storing excess output during period bumper harvest and releasing it during the period of scarcity, which will help to avoid overflooding in the market and thus stabilize prices of such products. 10. Use/operate buffer stock. This will involve buying surplus output by marketing boards during bumper/plenty harvest and sold in periods of scarcity, which will help to stabilize prices. 11. Use stabilization fund policy. This will involve buying the surplus output by the government, keeps it and sells it later to profit, which accumulate a fund out of which it will pay farmers as compensation for the reduction in incomes and thus help to stabilize their incomes. 12. Set minimum price for agricultural products. This will ensure that agricultural commodities are sold at the fixed price and cannot be changed unless the government decides so. 13. Adopt a strict quota system. This will regulate the supply of agricultural products so as to avoid flooding the market and thus stabilize prices.